Can we achieve a jet-setting retirement if we aren't earning a high income in Singapore? Watching my 72-year-old mother and her friends retire comfortably for many years gave me the strongest conviction that this is achievable with a modest income as long as you have the right strategy. My mom is retired since she was 62, and all her friends are also comfortably retired. I'm not referring to the simple, quiet, stay-at-home kind of retirement. All of them travel multiple times a year. On top of that, their travels are not limited to Southeast Asian countries or JB. They go places like Europe, Japan, Australia, China, and still visit neighboring countries for short trips. Even when they are in Singapore, their retirement lifestyle is filled with meaningful activities like going on walks to explore different parts of Singapore. And based on some of the photos my mom showed me, I've not even seen some of these places in Singapore myself. They also do volunteering and take up hobbies like line dancing and learning courses. What intrigued me is not their retirement lifestyle, but because I noticed that many of them, including my mom, come from totally normal backgrounds. Most of them have never earned 5 figures in their entire working lives. Some of their last drawn income is closer to our median income today, which is only about $5,700. This fascinates me because from my experience interacting with so many people who are doing retirement planning, these kinds of frequent jet-setting retirement lifestyle are often assumed to be achievable only by high-income earners. According to the 2024 Singapore Salary Guide, high-income earners generally gross $10,000 and above. So as someone who is very interested in retirement planning, there are two things I really like doing. The first is to observe people who have achieved the kind of retirement lifestyle many of my clients aspire to have and study their success model. The other thing I really like doing is to try and reverse engineer the process so that I can understand the key principles of how my parents' generation achieved this dream retirement lifestyle and then apply the applicable principles in modern retirement planning. So how did regular income earners fund these jet-setting retirements? Here's what I pieced together based on my own childhood observations growing up with my parents and the patterns I spotted interacting with my mom, her friends, and my clients who are happily retired. The first principle, they believe in delayed gratification. To illustrate what I mean, let me share a personal story growing up. When I was a young kid, I had this impression that we were financially not doing well. Because our family life was very frugal, there were no fancy holidays. I could count the number of countries I have visited before university with just one hand. There wasn't much lavish restaurant meals either. Yet at the same time, I never lacked for anything important. Like my education was paid for. University came without debt. When I needed private tuition, I got it. When I was hospitalized, we could afford private healthcare. Yet as a young kid, you take for granted the basic things like education and healthcare, but you take notice of the more apparent lifestyle ones that seems to be lacking. That's why I grew up with the impression that my parents must be financially not doing well. It is only later that I realized my parents were not stingy. They were masters of delayed gratification. In fact, there was this one day at the dinner table, I was casually chatting with my mom, and then she told me my parents had a specific goal to each set aside $100,000 to travel around the world together when they retired while maintaining their present standard of living even during retirement. I wowed when I heard it because 100k 20 to 30 years ago is a lot of money. In fact, it is still substantial today to a lot of people. So I was very amazed they had such an aspiration. In fact, I also met many people who mentioned that they see themselves spending lesser during retirement. So I was honestly quite impressed that my parents had the foresight to ensure their quality of life maintained. This is something consistent that I observe among those who are happily retired in this generation. They ration luxury for the future. Unlike our generation where we travel 3 to 4 times a year while working, to this generation, traveling around the world is a retirement goal, which is why those that plan their retirement well are traveling so frequently now. They achieve this by being very clear about their spending priorities. In their younger days, for example, for my parents, education, healthcare, and housing came first. Everything else was secondary. So one important lesson I took away is the importance of making intentional trade-offs with a clear long-term vision, especially when you don't earn a high income. Because you got to understand that this generation, they not only don't earn a lot, many of them were also a sandwich class taking care of their own elderly parents and young children. The second principle I picked up was saving relentlessly and letting compounding do the heavy lifting. So we already established that this generation is very thrifty. I was wondering what do they do with the money that they save. So I spoke to them and they told me back then the tool is very simple: fixed deposits. I googled historical fixed deposit rates, and this is the data I extracted from the MAS website. In the 1980s, FD rates could be a high 6% per annum. That's a risk-free return that matches what we expect from diversified portfolios today. The minimum to start was just $1,000, which was very different from today's promotional rates that require $10,000 to $20,000. So here's what stood out for me about this generation. Because they started off with very small amounts, they exhibit a great sense of patience, discipline, and using time to their biggest advantage. Every time they have extra money to save, they will add on to their entire savings pot. This combination of consistent additions plus compound growth by actively renewing their fixed deposits created this exponential result. So my mom shared with me that last time her lunchtime activity is to run from one bank to another to hunt for the best rate. This is how they build up a sizable lump sum of money that is generating sufficient income for them to have a jet-setting retirement currently. To provide some context on how much it costs to pay for such a lifestyle, you will need a passive income of at least $25,000 to $30,000 a year if you are retired today. The last principle I picked up is income matters as much as savings. Because our parents' generation generally have lesser education opportunities, most of them experience an income ceiling in their full-time jobs. In order to save more money, many of them work weekdays and weekends, taking on part-time side incomes. This forms part of their success formula. So if you are always working, you have no time to spend money. That automatically creates a surplus most people never build. Some of them also share with me that office jobs below a certain corporate rank paid overtime. So the hardest workers would volunteer to work OT at every opportunity. Again, this is more income with less time to spend. In fact, many of these retirees today are still very diligent in generating income. I think it's part of their DNA already. They still actively seek out low to moderate risk instruments that generate attractive income. Many of these retirees are still actively meeting me to manage their portfolios. The point I want to make is that our income still determines how much we get to save, assuming we spend responsibly. The good news is many of us earn significantly more than our parents' generation. The median income in Singapore in 2025 is already $5,700. For those of us who are working towards our dream retirement, what we really need to avoid is lifestyle inflation as our salaries increase. As long as we can avoid lifestyle creep and channel our higher earnings into income-building systems, achieving a comfortable retirement is very possible. The biggest takeaway I gathered from studying this generation is simple. A good retirement is rarely built on high income alone. It is built on three other things: early clarity, which means having a plan from the start; consistent action, which means following through regardless of market conditions; and strategic patience, which means understanding that wealth building takes time. Almost every comfortably retired person started with intention, not just hoping it would work out and settling for whatever lifestyle their residual savings can buy them. Times have changed, the tools have evolved, but the money principles haven't. The question isn't whether this approach is still relevant. It is a question of whether we have the same foresight and discipline to develop a plan and see it through. Hope you find this sharing useful. If you like to watch more of such content, do like and subscribe to this channel. I'll see you in the next video.